Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our first briefing today. We're pleased to have with us today Colonel Mike Hackerson from the Army's Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations Office. He's going to provide you a short information briefing on the AH-64 Alpha model Apache helicopter, its capabilities, and its doctrinal deployment. Following this briefing, we'll also have an Apache A model on static display outside the mall entrance. That Apache will be there until 3:30 this afternoon, and you're welcome and encouraged to go visit that. Colonel Hackerson, H-A-C-K-E-R-S-O-N. He also wears a name tag. Thank you. Colonel Hackerson.
Good morning. As Colonel Bridges said, my name is Colonel Mike Hackerson, and I commanded the 4th Brigade, or the Aviation Brigade, of the 1st Cavalry Division down at Fort Hood, Texas, until last summer when I had the opportunity to come up and work in the Pentagon. What I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit today about the Apache attack helicopter, talk briefly about the attack helicopter battalion, kind of show you what size it is, briefly discuss the doctrinal employment, and I do have a laydown of a doctrinal deep attack that I'd like to walk you through and answer any questions you might have. I have 3 charts to show you and no video. First of all, the AH-64 Apache helicopter is the most capable and lethal helicopter in the world, and I think that's recognized by everyone around the world. The aircraft you see right here is approximately 58 feet long, about 18 feet wide, and combat loaded runs just over 17,000 pounds. I said lethal, and let me walk you through the 3 weapon systems in the aircraft. First of all, the Hellfire missile system, which you see here, is a precision-guided missile capable of firing out to 8 kilometers, or about 4.5 miles. The aircraft's capable of carrying 16 Hellfire missiles. However, in this configuration, you will notice that it's set up for 8 missiles, 4 on each side. The second weapon system is the 2.75-inch. This is a folding fin aerial rocket. In this configuration, the aircraft carries 38 rockets. These are about 80 pounds, and they're effective out past 8,000 meters, or just past 4.5 miles. It's an area of fire weapon, but we have a combination of a laser rangefinder, which I'll talk to you more about, and a ballistic computer in the aircraft, which computes a known point so that the pilot is given an aiming point to help refine the area that the rocket will land in. So it is a very precise weapon system. The third weapon system, which you see here below the aircraft, is a 30-millimeter single-barrel cannon. Up and in a flat pack below the aircraft, it carries 1,200 rounds of high-explosive ammunition. It's accurate out past 4,000 meters, or about 2 miles. The aircraft, along with its weapon systems, is very capable for survivability. Inside, we have a radar warning system that tells the pilots when they are being strobed by any radar, and also warns them if the radar locks on and even if a missile is launched. In the case of a missile launch, we have a radar jammer on the aircraft which jams those radars, and for infrared missiles, we have an infrared jammer which also will jam and confuse infrared missiles. On the back of the aircraft, not shown, we also have a small chaff system which shoots a cartridge of aluminum strips, goes up and basically forms a cloud to also confuse the missiles. That combination enhances the survivability of the aircraft. Although coming forward, I would point out to you that you do know that that is plexiglass. We call it rolled homogeneous plexiglass. It's a little thin, but the pilots and the aircraft have built-in survivability with armored seats, a ballistic shield between the 2 pilots, and key pieces of the aircraft which are reinforced with Kevlar to prevent small arms from penetrating. As I mentioned, it's a crew of 2, a pilot in the back and a co-pilot gunner in the front, both rated Army aviators, both capable of flying the aircraft, with the co-pilot gunner in the front seat responsible for operating the TAD system, or the turret system, which I'll discuss in just a moment. This aircraft flies day-night and is primarily used at night because in a very lethal battlefield, we take advantage of the night. The system flies blacked out at night, and it is night vision goggle compatible, although we have found that FLIR, forward-looking infrared, is a much better system. This is a first-gen FLIR, first-generation FLIR. At night, the pilot's eye is right here on the front of the aircraft. This is a pilot night vision system that he sees in a heads-up display, a small single HDU that's over his right eye. All the information he needs to fly the aircraft is presented in that eye. He also gets a lower display which tells him what the co-pilot gunner is set on his weapon systems. FLIR, if you've not had a chance to look at it, you have to dig back into your kind of college and high school chemistry and physics, basically takes a processor to a very cold temperature, down to almost 0 Kelvin, so that it can see differences in temperature in tenths of degree. What that allows us to do is see a green picture, which is very much like a day camera, although it's showing the differential heat. And we found that vehicles absorb a lot of heat, so they're very easy to see, especially when they're running, and personnel give off a lot of heat, and when they see the Apache, especially when they're running. The front system here has the FLIR, and the co-pilot gunner operates the FLIR. It is a day TV also. It has a direct view optic, so he can look through it much like a telescope, which has over a 200 power telescope. It also has a laser rangefinder, so he can accurately determine the range to targets. And it has a designator, which is a 4-digit code designator that allows him to tell the Hellfire missile on a certain code that is in fact the right laser, so the Hellfire missile will find that code and track right to that code. I used to use the analogy of a flashlight in that the missile sees its own flashlight. Now, since everyone carries laser pointers, I can refer it more to a laser pointer, because that's what it is, a laser pointer with a 4-digit code, which is compatible with the Air Force and the Navy and is NATO standard, so that we can operate in the coalition. This aircraft was designed to operate in the NATO environment. The radio suite that allows us to communicate both with the ground consists of Fox mic radios, our frequency modulated radios, and also has ultra-high and very high frequency radios, which are compatible with both the Air Force and the Navy. So we can coordinate and talk directly to Air Force, Navy, and other NATO aircraft. Let me take you into the front seat just a second, and I'll show you the co-pilot gunner station. This is a picture of the co-pilot gunner station. As I mentioned, he is capable of flying the aircraft. You see the flight controls here, but this center cyclic also collapses down out of his way when he's doing his gunner duties. He basically has two options. You'll notice here an eyepiece where he can lean forward and look directly at the target, or he can sit back and has a small video display screen and see the same information. All of the controls for the weapon systems are on these two grips, with the laser grip and on this side with the weapons grip, so that he can control all of the systems without taking his hands off of the optical relay tube, or the ORT, this piece that you see here in front. You'll notice he does have a complete set of backup systems so that he can fly the aircraft from that seat if required. Both pilots can operate all of the weapon systems. The helmet display unit that the pilot and co-pilot wear when they're flying the aircraft is bore-sighted to the aircraft. That is, just like you get in your car and adjust the mirrors, we do the same thing in that we adjust the gun to the eye of the pilot, right to the center point of his eye. What we find is that it's adjusted based on where the seat is. In peacetime, they tend to fly a little higher, and in combat a little lower. So we had to build a system in to allow them to make sure it was adjusted. Wherever the pilot looks, he can fire that gun. That's the backup protection for the aircraft in a close fight. The doctrinal employment of the aircraft was really built in the Cold War era, and the Apaches were designed to go after high-value targets. Those high-value targets are armor fighting vehicles, and artillery units. We've built the units at 24 aircraft each based on the ability to take out a Soviet-style tank regiment of up to 95 tanks at one engagement. These aircraft are used, the units are used doctrinally by division and corps commanders in what we call the 3-step or action, reaction, counteraction. As the ground commander moves forward in offensive operations, he begins action. The enemy would react either by massing armor forces or massing artillery to counter the offensive operation. We use the Apaches at night in anticipation of that to go after those high-value targets, to then take out the armor or artillery targets that are presented as the enemy tries to react. In a defensive scenario, if we are not on the offensive, this is the most responsive platform that the division or corps commander has to respond to the force that we call the oh my God force. The enemy is also out trying to get in our rear and flanks, and this can break friction with the ground and operate in that fourth dimension to move quickly across the ground to counter that threat.
Colonel, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Does it make a difference that you will not have a massing of the adversary's forces here, and that this Apache will not be in support of ground troops? What differences will that make to the mission?
It's still capable, and I'll talk you through the deep attack piece. It's still capable of going after those high-value targets and also command and control nodes, which is another area. We also do joint air attack with the Air Force and practice that, so we can get a synergy of the precision of our laser designation with the Air Force from altitude dropping bombs. So there's a synergy that we gain from that, and it gives the commander another opportunity, another flexible tool to use. And I'll show you a little more of that when we walk through the deep attack. The Apache battalions that I've been talking about consist of 320 soldiers. I commanded a battalion at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and I used to try to explain it to folks as I was the mayor of a small community with an attitude. It has a headquarters and headquarters company which provides basically your restaurant, your garage, your fueling station. It has 3 line companies, each having 8 attack helicopters, which provide you the lethality and killing power, and a Delta company, a 5th company, which is the maintenance company, providing the maintenance support. We also have, in a support maintenance backup role, about 200 more soldiers that provide us our wholesale fuel and also do some of the specialty maintenance required. So they would provide us the specialty maintenance, the Midas muffler shop, and those areas that you just don't keep those parts available all times. So you're really talking about 500 folks when you talk about the employment of an Apache battalion. Let me talk you through a deep attack mission, a doctrinal role. First of all, let me point out that this is commanded and controlled, and I'll start in the lower right corner, from a deep operations cell, both at division and corps level. This cell is normally in the division or corps headquarters, and it brings together either the chief of staff or the senior leadership of the corps, the senior aviation commander, and the artillery commander, with a lot of support from the intelligence community. They then, based on the commander's intent, decide what targets will be engaged, begin the process of requiring the intelligence community to detect those targets, and then determine what systems will deliver the assets or the ammunition, and then at the end of that, of course, assess the effectiveness of that operation. This deep operations cell is doctrinally located, as I say, in the division or corps headquarters to bring together all of the intelligence collection and capabilities. The requirements that they have, and we'll tick down each of these, are shown here. First of all, I'll walk you across the graphic. Basically, we have an attack battalion at some location here in the rear area, moving along routes. These routes are coordinated to a passage point. In this case, we have what we refer to as a front line of troops, or you could call it a border, to a release point into battle positions based on an engagement area where we expect to take out the target that's been identified by the commander, whether it's command and control, high-value targets. You'll notice that this is a massed attack with multiple battle positions, and we have also planned that if we should happen to not line up directly on the target, we have limited flexibility to move to an alternate planned location. You'll also notice that we have targeted with artillery or coordinated points where we expect air defense. And I'll talk a little bit more about it as we go through this line of required events. Clearance of fires is the coordination in that cell with the artillery and other folks that are firing on the battlefield to make sure that as we fly, we are not going through someone else's fire. The timely intelligence is gained by the intelligence community, which is co-located with us, and they bring in national assets, the UAV assets, and signals intelligence, other intelligence collection methods to bring together a clear intelligence picture of the battlefield, to make sure that we know what's out there and what's not out there. They also do the target monitoring to monitor if those targets have moved or in fact are moving into an area that we have set to engage those targets, to trap them in that area. Weapons effects is determined by the number of targets and what you want to be taken out. I mentioned a Soviet regiment, and we would go full up with 16 Hellfire missiles on each aircraft for the mass destruction of that unit. We also coordinate all the communications, not only with the Army, but with the Air Force, to make sure that we're talking to everyone on the battlefield. We coordinate the suppression of enemy air defense. SEAD is done both from the Army standpoint with our own artillery and ATACMS, and also in a joint context with the Air Force, using the Prowler jamming aircraft, and in some cases, because these are projected sites, possibly on high ground, the Air Force may have already engaged that target because it affects their flying in the same area. Anytime you go that deep into enemy territory, you want to have a combat search and rescue coordinated. This coordination is conducted at the Deep Operations Cell also, and there are CSAR forces on standby at all times to pick up down crews. The Army crews go through the same type of training that the Air Force crews go through. The A²C² is the Army Airspace Command and Control. We operate in the arena normally 500 feet and below, so our coordination is done with all of our own air defense systems forward and our own artillery systems. We have weather and visibility that we track throughout the region and have our own weather observations so we can get good weather observation throughout the entire range. We constantly focus on safety as a key issue, and of course the event trigger is a determination of when this process begins, based on an enemy that we confirm in a location or that a movement rate that we anticipate that target would move to that location, and we'll be there waiting for them. We'd rather be set and waiting for them to come to us. I would point out that these missions are high-risk missions, and we recognize that. We've trained for that, and we've conducted these operations and rehearsals over all these years against a Soviet-style threat with a very aggressive air defense umbrella. And so while we recognize it as high risk, we have done a lot of things to mitigate those risks, both on the aircraft, in the training, and in the coordination that goes on in the Deep Operations Cell. And with that, I'll leave it for your questions and be glad to talk to you about how we do this.
PRP and PP on your...
I'm sorry? This is the start point of the route, a passage point coordinated on the ground if there was someone here, or just a passage point where we now cross a boundary or border. The release point where we then take up a lower flight profile to move stealthily into the actual battle positions.
On the RP back on the left, bottom left.
Yes.
You have an SP.
This is capable of going out in one route, turning and coming back in a second route. Gives you the flexibility for two coordinated routes based on the enemy situation to come out.
From what you know about the dispersal of Serb forces in Kosovo, how much does that complicate the mission of the Apache?
It complicates the intelligence collection to make sure that you can find them. We do have a lot of assets that we are using to locate those targets. I think there's high-value targets are locatable, and you get the precision from this weapon system that allows you to take out individual weapons, because we do point the laser right to the single target.
Yeah, you said the Apache battalion is comprised of about 500 personnel. We're sending in 5,000, and you did not include the MLRS package in your outline here. What's the difference between what's going on now in Albania with the Apaches and this plan that you're talking about?
If you notice, I set this up in a doctrinal graphic, which is ahead of me is a division's worth, about 16,000 soldiers. In a normal operation, I'm back here behind all of that force structure. That provides me force protection and early warning. And because I do have to do maintenance on the aircraft, I'm back well away from that. Setting up here in a forward area like Albania with very limited assets, the force protection package that has flowed in is really designed to replicate a portion of that force that provides force protection around this entire area for not only the Apaches, but for the entire force that's on the ground.
So how does that complicate the mission? Does that present an increased risk to the Apaches since they do not have that forward deployment?
It makes me feel a lot more comfortable when I have the Bradleys and tanks around me. So I appreciate that ability to be protected back there. So I don't think it'll impact on the Apache missions at all.
Okay, but it's not forward deployed.
No, it's deployed here in protection of the basically in the Tirana area.
So, but what's the difference then here? Because in this package, you don't have the MLRS. So what's the difference between what's going to happen if the Apaches are deployed in Kosovo and what you're talking about here?
Well, this piece of the fight that takes place here is where this looks like a pretty straight route, but we use the terrain and take advantage of that. So we would use the terrain to our advantage, and I don't think it would be any impact on it. Yeah.
May I just add one thing, because I want to make sure your question is closed out.
To the mic.
He had mentioned before the suppression of enemy air defense, and he mentioned a lot of different assets that tie into that. That's where the MLRS package comes in. So even though it's not shown on this doctrinal graphic, the MLRS is there for that particular purpose as well.
And is that primarily why there are 10 times as many forces deployed with this group as there would be with a normal Apache battalion?
Well, once again, what he said is that what those troops that are there to do are to replicate at least a portion of what would be in front on this doctrinal representation, all of those division troops.
Yeah.
A couple of questions. We know that there's an Apache longbow system with a radome on top of the mast. Why are we using the A system and not the longbow system, which we understand is more flexible? You can fire over things without popping up and exposing yourself. Right. And also, what you're describing is deep attack on pre-selected, carefully selected targets with carefully planned routes in and out, so you're not talking about going in and hunting for targets of opportunity.
That is correct. This is not a mission to go hunting for targets. It would be very well orchestrated and planned. And to your first question, since I fly both, I can kind of comment on that. One of the key issues that you have here is a battlefield with a lot of displaced persons and civilians on it. So one of the things to look at is we may well want to use the laser-guided munitions to make sure that each round is guided to a target so that we have the opportunity, as we engage that target, to pull that round off the target if for some reason we determine that there may be the risk to civilians in that area. So we get a lot of capability from the A model, and I'm not sure we need to employ the D model. It's capable, ready to go, but it's nice to have an ace in the hole.
Could you tell us what the D model does that the A model doesn't? Could you?
The basic difference is it's the digital platform, and it's a glimpse of the future of the Army. The main piece of that is a fire control radar and an IDM or a large system that integrates digital modem to other systems that allows you to import information into the cockpit, to what we're doing now with voice. But it's very capable, and it's really a glimpse of the future.
You mentioned that you have done some training with Air Force assets, and
Yeah.
I wondered, when you've done that, have you been controlled by AH-64A as the tactical air is over there now being controlled? Have you worked that?
You can do that, but I've actually done what we call a pickup JAT, which is calling on a frequency. We have a standard 9-line message that we send back and forth. And that standard 9-line message, we carry a copy right in the cockpit, and the Air Force trains to that. So even we can either do it through a coordinated forward controller or the AH-64C, or in fact, if the situation warrants it, with that standard call, we can orchestrate the mission together with the Air Force.
The regiment is going out with a deep attack command and control cell. Will it have the capability to pull down rivet joint information, J-stars, moving target imagery? Give us a sense of what's there deployed now in this high-tech cell you have.
Yeah,
in Toronto.
this cell will be able to pull all of that information down. What I was able to do in my previous dock, when I was running the dock, is I had 4 large screen TVs that showed me both the AFATADs, the artillery picture, the air defense picture, a downlink from the UAVs, and on a 4th screen I could pull up either a J-stars downfeed. All of that information I could observe along with the artillery commander and the intelligence commander, and then collectively we have radio contact with that unit forward and several alternative routes that they can very quickly be told to turn to. And so all that is collected at the dock, monitored throughout the mission, and then if required it is voice or sent forward to the aircraft.
A Hellfire follow-up. how long would it take one Apache to fire all 16 Hellfires, assuming a 3-mile engagement? Like 20 seconds per missile?
It actually takes about 30 seconds apiece. Basically what you have is you run out of targets very quickly. The laser code spins the missiles up, and you literally, as fast as you have launched, you can do ripple launches. So you can have several in the air at the same time, and then just by moving the laser spot to the next target.
And each laser, there's a code that each missile reads a specific code,
Right.
so there's not crossing up of hits.
Correct. You set that code in the missile, and you set it in the aircraft before you launch the missile. And I can even
16 different codes.
You can do it on one code or 2 codes or as many as you need. You have the capability to separate them, but it depends on how many designators you have out there.
Colonel, you're talking about, I mean, you've labeled this thing as high-risk mission, and this you're talking about with 16,000 troops ahead. How would you describe the missions that you're really going to be facing in Kosovo, where you don't have any troops ahead? You're talking about moving targets, not established targets, not command and control nodules, but what we've been led to believe up close and personal with troops on the ground and individual pieces of artillery and moving tanks. I mean, this is high risk. What do you call that?
Well, the high-risk portion of this part actually starts right here. And that's the same area that we'll be operating in. In a lot of this area, there's not 16,000 troops, but there may not be anyone out there. So we're really talking about this range, and it is high risk from the standpoint of small arms. That's our primary concern, small arms and shoulder-fired weapons. And that's why we take maximum advantage of the night and of the terrain to make sure that we do terrain masking and terrain following, which really denies the gunner with an optically guided system the ability to engage us.
Without, how small an arm can take out one of these Apaches? I mean, we've been told, can an AK-47 take one out? If he doesn't see
You
it?
know, I'm a bit superstitious, so I never say never. But it would take a pretty good hit. The system is actually designed, the power system of the aircraft is designed to take a hit from a 23 millimeter and keep flying. You'll notice the engines are separated by a blast shield very similar to the A-10. So we've done a lot of work to make that a very supportable aircraft. You can sit very low in your seat, and you minimize your exposure. And as I mentioned, there is a blast shield between the 2 pilots to really cut down on that. But it would take a pretty healthy round to bring an Apache down.
Sir, can you tell us if a colonel is the normal battalion chief for an operation like this, why is it necessary to have a 3-star general on the ground for this operation?
Well, the dock, as I say, in this case is run out of the Corps headquarters. The Corps commander, the 3-star, is the commander of that dock. He's normally located with that cell in his command post. So it's doctrinally sound for him to be there with the deep operations cell. Normally it would be his chief of staff designated to actually run the operation. In a division at a 2-star level, normally the chief of staff runs that, who happens to be a full colonel, along with myself if I was the aviation brigade commander.
So he's the Corps commander in addition to the...
That's correct.
Two questions, please. One, besides flying beneath radar, ground hugging, does it have any other stealth capabilities, quieting or any of that sort of thing?
It actually is a very quiet and cool aircraft. If the picture we have really doesn't show it, but we actually have a cooling system on the back of the engines which cools it and also makes it very hard for the infrared missiles to lock on. We learned a lot of lessons out of Vietnam, and we've really put all of those to place. The aircraft was designed, and Boeing has done a great job of bringing in all of those systems. A lot of aviators have put a lot of time into it to minimize all those risks so that you become an old aviator like me.
And the second question is, many experts have said this is about as close to a ground war as you're going to get. Although they fly, are they in fact a ground war element?
You know, it's a maneuver force, and a maneuver force in that we work in the 4th dimension, which is the air. We break friction with the ground. So we're a maneuver force, and our mission is normally to support by fire other maneuver forces. But we do, as I say, train in the JAT, in the Joint Air Attack. So it really, I've mentioned to several folks, it really gives the commander another arrow in his quiver, if you will, of systems that allow him to be more flexible in his engagement.
How will these crews be briefed on the particular risks they face in the region, in Kosovo? I mean, terrain, arms, dispersal of arms, whatever. How will they be briefed on that?
The briefings, this is a very standard doctrinal mission, actually. The target array is somewhat smaller, potentially. But it remains to be seen if the enemy is required to mass his targets. If he's required to mass for some reason, or if he starts moving around the countryside, he really puts himself at risk for an attack from the Apaches.
Is the 150 kilometers you show there kind of a standard, or is that a maximum range for?
It's about a standard range. You'll notice that it starts from a refueling point or an assembly area here. And there's been several questions asked about refueling farther forward. By simply moving up a fuel station, which can be brought in large 500-gallon blivets, set up very quickly, topping off the aircraft, and then withdrawn right back, you can extend that range on out significantly. If you recall, during Desert Storm, the Apaches on day one flew up into what was called FOB Cobra with the 101st. They refueled there and then went all the way to the Euphrates River. Interestingly enough, they caught a large armor column moving along the Euphrates River, and when they engaged that column, all the tanks began firing up in the air because they thought they'd been engaged by the Air Force.
Colonel, I want to try that again. I understand about what they may face if they mass their artillery or mass their armor. But given the situation that exists now, what special risks, peculiar to the situation as it exists now, do you think will be part of the briefing for these aircrafts?
Probably the special risk will be the fact that there are a lot of individuals out on the battlefield in very small numbers that are carrying small arms and shoulder-fired weapons. Those are hard to find, and you will have meeting engagements with those folks. It'll be a little more disorganized than a normal column of tanks that you would see and be able to identify. But that's a risk that we're prepared to take on it. It'll turn into it could potentially turn into a bit of a knife fight, but that's part of the business.
I had a technology question and a unit question. Can you talk a little bit about this unit's familiarity with the area? According to their internet homepage, they've been in Bosnia on 3 separate occasions in the last 4 years. They were in Desert Storm and knocked off about 250 vehicles, according to their homepage anyway.
Right.
Does that familiarity with the region help in terms of planning for the battle?
It helps a lot because they've been flying in a similar environment. You're right, they did come back about 7 months ago. They went back into an intensive training phase. They just finished training at Hohenfels, Germany, one of the major training centers in all blackout night operations, and are probably the best trained Apache unit in the Army right now to go in on this mission.
I have a technology question. The ones in Bosnia.
An easy one, please.
This is they had a off-the-shelf video technology, something called phototelesis,
Right.
that allowed their gun cameras apparently to take real-time video and push it back to the commanders in the back. Will these Apaches have that so that it's another layer of intelligence on the battlefield?
I'm glad you asked that because I meant to mention there is a video recorder that runs in the aircraft, and those video recorders, you can then, it was designed to do was to take a video scan of the battlefield, go back behind a covered area, take a quick look at that to make sure you understand the environment, and then come back to engage. What we found is it's a very valuable intelligence collection platform that allows us to tape the entire battle and bring that tape back for analysis. Phototelesis is a system that works very well to allow that to be ported back. I don't know right now whether they have phototelesis in theater.
Is the Apache that crashed going to be replaced?
It will be repaired. The crew's back to duty. I don't know how long it takes to dust it off and put it back together, but it will be repaired.
Colonel, on in the normal doctrinal operations, what role do the AH-64A scouts play? And does it matter if they're not here now?
I'm glad you asked because in my last job, as I mentioned, I had a cavalry squadron because I had the tanks, Bradleys, and the Kiowa Warriors. Kiowa Warriors really work in concert with the ground cavalry unit to provide that intelligence to the division or corps commander. The attack battalion that we have configured now with 24 aircraft is designed to do its own scouting and attack. In the old days, you recall an old Kiowa Warrior, a small helicopter out in front of the Apaches, or at least in the old Cobra days, I'm dating myself, following them around. Because we have GPS system in the Apache now, the global positioning system, and we know where we are all the time, we've taken that mission on now to be able to scout and attack out of the same aircraft. So it doesn't restrict the mission to not have the Kiowa Warriors here. They're capable of operating in another area and give the commanders another whole flexible capability that he has to do other things.
So just to follow up, you don't reckon it matters that they haven't sent out any?
No.
Anyways, okay. And a second one, do you have the capability in the Apache to loiter forward rather than coming out from your start point? Do you have the endurance capability to loiter forward and to be called in, therefore, for targets of opportunity?
Not so much to loiter forward, but there is a built-in time forward to actually engage. So we have 30 to 40 minutes forward to conduct that actual operation and come back. So we build our timing in to make sure that while we're forward, we're not pressed in time and fuel.
How long are the missions?
Normally they'll be about a little over 2 hours. And that's 2 hours in a blacked out cockpit with looking through one eye, so it seems a little longer. It does give you a headache. I had hair when I started flying. So.
Colonel, the scout function that you talked about is, from what I understand, normally taken on by about 9 of the aircraft, with the other 15 being loaded up. The picture that you had shown us, the weapons platform, is in the scout configuration with the rocket pod in place of another 4 Hellfires on each wing sponson. How will this role that you anticipate seeing in terms of having to actually face a target that's not massed up together change the picture that you've shown us? What you've shown us from this deep attack shows more of what you anticipated from, say, a Soviet threat. Right. But where will these 9 scouts be in relationship to the heavy shooters to dig these guys out of the hillside?
They'll normally be working right in concert with them, possibly a little bit forward as the designator. If you had a heavy aircraft with 16 missiles, it may well stand back just behind the other aircraft, allowing one designator, and then he can shoot all his missiles. Really, the term scout is more of a designation of who's up front. You scout today, I'll scout tomorrow, because the crews are trained in both missions, so it's more of a function of who's in the lead and tailoring the number of missiles on the aircraft to the mission.
Just a couple of things. So how fast is the helicopter, and how far can it go without refueling? And have we gotten the correct impression that you're saying that the optimal use of the aircraft is in concert with a ground force that can flush out the enemy or cause massing?
That is the optimal use. But it is very capable, and the Army's invested a lot of money to make sure it is compatible with both the Air Force and the Navy because of the ability it brings the commander to bring air and ground together. As far as time and distance, it actually will do almost 200 miles an hour, but if you notice the structure, it's not very aerodynamic. In fact, some would call it ugly. We prefer to think of it as a very lethal machine. It will go up to 200. We normally fly at about 120 knots. And in a deep mission at night, it would normally be in the range of about 90 knots, which is a little over 100 to 110 miles an hour. That's below 100 feet with no lights.
Sir, can you explain a little bit more about how it would work with the Air Force? Would it go and spot a target that would then be struck by
Yeah, that's what we've done in the past and worked very effectively in Desert Storm. We were able to bring in the laser-guided munitions off a platform, an Air Force platform, and say, look, we have eyes on a very specific target, command and control node, some key target. And we could call them on a common frequency, say, look, I'll give you my code. They then see that in a pod on the aircraft, say, I see your code, Roger, and with this 9-line sequence, we can line them up and they can actually launch that missile to the point that we're designating. And it becomes an orchestration of the two systems to turn the light on in time and then bring the weapon right onto it.
But the helicopters are not going to be out there looking for targets of opportunity, if I understand you right. They're going to go with something.
That's correct. It just adds an additional capability that while you're out there, you know, in the best of all worlds, if you run out of ammunition, it's always nice to have someone else out there with more. So we can bring that together and use their rounds too. Yes.
A couple of questions. One, in this context, we're talking Kosovo, would you expect to operate with designated air cover provided by, high air cover provided by the Air Force? And also, the Apache, fairly or not, has a reputation as a hangar queen. Can you discuss that and give us some kind of statistics on mean time between failures and how much time it spends in the garage versus how much in the air?
And I'm glad you asked that. First of all, yes, we'll be in direct coordination with the Air Force, and that's standard doctrinal procedure because we coordinate when we're deep, not only, as I mentioned, like E-6 Prowlers, but there's a whole suite of aircraft that provide us electronic protection, and also if in fact there is an air threat, they would be providing an air cover. So we really take advantage of both of those systems. I speak both languages. I'm a combined arms officer, but I speak air. And that's an extra skill set that I bring to the Army. I was commissioned in infantry. I was actually an old engineer sergeant, but you know, we bring that, the Army aviators bring that to the fight. The Hangar Queen is a great piece. I got asked a lot on several years ago on the gun because there was some bad publicity on it. I had 2 years in command, and the last week I was in command actually had a gun jam. But that was 2 years of steady firing without any problems. Right now the aircraft is operating well above the Department of Army standards, and did the same in Desert Storm if you go back and look at the numbers.
Two of them didn't make it over initially to Tirana. What happened to them?
Well, as with anything, I have an 88 Sable that makes it to work most days. You know, those things happen and it'll be fixed and on the way. I honestly, I don't know exactly what happened to that one.
The mission
Is there
capable.
an air-to-air capability do the Serbs have an air capability that could be a threat to the Apaches, and are the Apaches equipped to counter it?
We are, and we train to that. The advantage we have when you get into a conflict with other aircraft is that we can stop. And when you can stop very quickly, you gain positional advantage on the enemy. And so the challenge of aircraft going after helicopters is, one, we're armed with a weapon system that fires several miles out with my eye, so as I track the target I can shoot. And two, as they start to engage, they very rapidly go past a point of no return where they're diving very steeply. So we gain the advantage there in the gun that we have on board.
What about the Serb helicopters? Can they shoot down other helicopters?
You know, we've looked at the Soviet-style helicopters, and we've never had an air-to-air encounter, but we do train to encounter that. It would be a fight, but I'm confident that we would win.
Colonel, don't the Yugoslav Army use the old Soviet tactics?
They do. So we're very familiar with the way they operate and the equipment.
They would probably, in fact, be masked, right?
They will have a tendency to want to mass. Human nature tends to, you find people want to get closer together in times of conflict, so they tend to mass whether they want to or not.
So will the helicopters that are in Albania fly over Kosovo and operate deep like you're telling us?
They have the potential to, yeah. I'm just a colonel in this operation. I would have to defer that to folks in the know.
Up until this point, the most publicity the Apaches received in this operation is the question of where are the Apaches? They've been put up as the poster boy for the Pentagon's seeming inconsistency to move quickly out of their doctrine of an expeditionary force.
Right.
Talk a little bit about that. Is that, in this case, a fair criticism?
It's a little bit like a doctor watching a medical show. You know, if you ever sit with them, they kibitz quite a bit about not being very real. The Apache battalion, as I mentioned, is only about 500 folks. Very quickly, very rapid to move. You can put 6 Apaches in a C-5 and move it. We practice all the time moving those air assets around the world. That piece moves very quickly, especially in a mature theater where you have a more robust ground environment. I think one of the big challenges we have, my wife is from Chicago, and so I have learned parking patience, looking for a parking spot. If you've looked at Tirana, you'll find that there are 2 very major competing demands, both in the humanitarian side and then trying to move a force in that didn't have to be there tonight. So the commander, I think, is really making some key calls on the ground as to what's more important at that time. And I think there's a parking patience issue going on, just getting the force in based on the humanitarian requirements.
Laser follow-up too. We know that lasers, bad weather degrades the lasers drop from an airplane. To what extent will lasers degrade an Apache firing from 200 feet above
Actually,
the ground?
the nice thing is that cloud layers go this way and very rarely go this way. So we get a real advantage because we operate under the cloud level. So what you see many times is a prohibiting factor for engaging from high altitude. Down around 100 feet, it's pretty clear.
Moisture screwing up any of the circuitry in the Apache.
You know, I've operated them all the way around the world, including the dust and everywhere else, and it's just one of the things that you really train to keep it out. The rain doesn't bother them. I have mine parked for 2 years out at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and got in and flew them every day.
There have been questions about there were questions in the Title IV Desert Storm report, but they've been raised since by GAO about the efficacy of the radio communications at very low level. Have those been resolved? What are the problems remaining?
Well, the radios are line of sight, and so we have added a few things. The satellite technology has given us a tremendous opportunity to bounce things, and we also have added high-frequency radios. And so I think that has been mitigated with the new radios and the new systems. Also then, as we look to the future with Apache, we have the capability for data modem to actually bounce that very effectively off a series of platforms.
But these helicopters will have satellite bounce?
They have the capability, yes.
Sustained operations obviously take their toll, maintenance, that sort of thing. In sustained operations, I realize this is hypothetical, but of the 24 in a battalion, how many would you expect would be available on a day-to-day basis?
The DA standard, what we expect is at least 75%. And that's why if you do some kind of back-of-the-envelope math, you would find that 75% of a 24 ship against a Soviet force of about 95 tanks works out to they're all dead and we're out of ammunition. So that I would anticipate it'll be well above 75%, but that's what the standard that's been set for us.
Colonel, have you found any evidence that the Serb forces are using or trying to use decoy type or tanks, artillery, the way the Iraqis were somewhat effective during the Gulf War in using?
I have not seen any reports on that myself.
Colonel, are you at all concerned that the Serbs might try to gun one of these down in Albania on its way out?
You know, it's a hostile environment anywhere you go, and I can tell you that the crews are prepared for any encounter. So there's always the threat anywhere you go.
Can I pursue one of Tony's points about the expeditionary nature of it? You were saying that you can get 6 into a C5.
C5,
and
yes.
Indeed, that was what was done at the beginning of Desert Storm, I think. They were first done it. But those 6 in a C5 have to be accompanied by kind of how big a load of backup and support? Actually, give me a sense of the footprint of that.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. There are about 50 trucks in an attack battalion, but not all that's required to go forward. So you can actually, between 6 and about 12 sorties of C5s, you could move the pointed end spear of an attack battalion and employ it. And in fact, in Desert Storm, early on, when the 82nd Airborne was on the ground, those Apaches that came out were assembled and flew forward and became the covering force very quickly. Within the day, they were put back together and forward as the protection for the 82nd initially. Yeah.
I'm still trying to understand whether it would be General Hendricks back at the dock in Tirana, or it would be an Air Force AH-64A that would probably be directing them to targets of opportunity, that sort of thing. Something that wasn't a planned target, such as what you laid out here.
Yeah. It would be the commander in the dock, the Corps commander or his designated representative. I don't know who that would be right now, who will make that decision. But if in fact there was, as an example with AH-64A, we will normally have a liaison, an Army liaison on board that aircraft, and he'll be talking directly with the commander and assessing all of that intelligence. So that would be, doctrinally, we would have someone on board the AH-64A, but the decision would still be made to launch based on an event and then to make any changes on that based on what was observed during the flight, and that would be made out of the dock. The battalion commander has, depending on the situation, may well be forward a lieutenant colonel in that flight, and he would be the other commander forward actually flying the mission.
Some of us were at a breakfast 3 days ago with General Klaus Naumann, the NATO's military commander, chairman of the military committee. Right. He said that General Clark requested the Apaches within 2 days of the operation commencing because Milosevic didn't blink. But the general went on to say that a debate began inside the Pentagon about whether to employ the helicopters. Can you give us a flavor for some of the thinking that's going on in the last month in this building in terms of employing the Apaches over there?
The only piece that I have been aware of, and again, this is, as you see, a very large building, so a discussion in the Pentagon takes on a whole new context. That was the initial concern of the force protection piece, to make sure that there was enough, a robust enough force protection force on the ground prior to bringing the Apaches in. You know, it's a little bit like doing some work on your car in the driveway, the neighbors are very concerned that you're going to get it back together by Monday, and it's a lot easier if somebody's not shooting at you. So, I mean, there's always that concern to make sure that you protect the force. And
Concern about the applicability of these choppers for the mission. It was more of the package that would go with them.
I believe, but I mean, that's as far as I know. That's a conversation that I've heard on it.
Colonel, is it your understanding that there will be nothing on the ground, in spite of the fact that some additional equipment's been called for, that we're talking very short-range missiles, 1.5 mile range, that there will be absolutely nothing on the ground beneath these Apaches once they cross that border into Kosovo?
You know, I don't know. I mean, I'm not in the theater, so for me to say that would kind of be out of my lane. I'd have to defer to the folks in Europe to ask them to get a better intelligence assessment on it.
Without anything on the ground, how high of a risk does this high-risk mission become if there's nothing there? Once they cross that border, they're on their own and nothing helping them but what's up above.
Oh, that's the environment that we train to fly in without anybody else below us down there. So, I mean, that's the way we've trained for all these years. That's just the way the mission is. Attack helicopters, that's what we do.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Good briefing.